So, Mr. Wayne, uh, so I understand that you want to direct a movie? Well, yes, Pilgrim, that's exactly what I want to do. Well, okay, you're known for a lot of westerns and a few war movies. What exactly are you looking to do? Well, Pilgrim, it's actually exactly that. It's a western and a war movie. Okay, okay. This is your first directorial debut, Mr. Wayne. So what exactly are you looking to do? Well, Pilgrim, it's a dream project I've been wanting to do for a while. Okay, Mr. Wayne, what exactly is that? It's just a little thing known as the Alamo. Hello, YouTube. It is Adam Noyce from Adam Noyce, and I just want to apologize right now. I'm back in New Hampshire, and stupid me forgot to grab my camera, and also forgot to grab my microphone. So I'm kind of double fucked here, and unfortunately, the audio is going to suck, and the video isn't going to be as good, anyways. Though, granted, with my videos, you listen to it rather than watch it, so I feel really sorry for you right off the back, and I really do apologize. But I really want to talk about this. Um, and that is the 1960 film The Alamo, directed by none other than John Wayne. Freedom, I like the sound of that. That just explains the entire movie right there in a nutshell. I really want to talk about my nostalgia for the film. I have a shit ton of nostalgia for this film. I remember it was playing on Turner Classic Movies when I was like 6 years old, and my father and I sat down and watched it. My father was working, and I wound up watching the whole thing. And I remember that this was the movie that really introduced me to what the fuck overtures, intermissions, and exit musics were, because this is the first time I ever sat down and like really watched a movie full through, and it was this movie. And it's a grand, sweeping epic, and so that kind of already started off my fascination with the epics at such a young age. But then one day when we were at Walmart, I got dragged to Walmart because we were going to there's a store down here or up here I should say in New Hampshire called Mr. Pizza. And it has like the greatest pizza ever. It's just a wonderful restaurant. Shout out if you're ever in Gorham, New Hampshire, go there. But I remember going to Walmart before that and being like, God damn it. So I went to the movie section when I was like 10, and I found a DVD called The Alamo with John Wayne, Richard Widmark, and I was like, oh my God, this is the movie. So I bought it, and I remember specifically going home that night, and my father and I sat down and watched it. And I had a time in my life rewatching it. However, I noticed there were a few things missing other than the overture, intermission, and exit music, but I'll get to that a little later. But my nostalgia for this film is huge. I mean, I remember the battle scenes. I remember the cattle scene. I remember a lot when I was a kid. When the people of the Alamo go outside and they're like, "Oh shit, we're low on food. Well, let's go steal some cattle from the Mexicans." And that's exactly what they do. I remember that scene as a kid. I was like, "Oh my god, that's awesome." I also remember the big cannon. I have a lot of memories with this film. The second thing that I really want to talk about is John Wayne himself. This was always a dream project for him. He was always fascinated with the story of the Alamo. He was always fascinated with why these 185 Texicans went out there and died for what they believed in against an army of 4 to 7,000 Mexican troops under the command of Santa Anna. He was always fascinated by that, just like how I was always fascinated by that. Granted, this is the movie that really actually, no. Davy Crockett made a 1955, the Walt Disney TV movie, I think, was what introduced me to the Alamo and started my fascination with it. But I too had a huge fascination with the Alamo, and thus that's what I did. I started doing research on the Alamo. I was watching whatever I could on the Alamo. Luckily, at that time, the 2004, I believe, Alamo came out with Billy Bob Thornton, which I may talk about later, but I'll just state it right now. I think that movie's okay, though really historically accurate from what we know, unlike this movie. But that so there were a bunch of these documentaries that were coming on TV on the History Channel about the Alamo. So my fascination with this battle just fucking exploded in my head. That's pretty much what happened. Just like John Wayne. John Wayne was always fascinated by this story. He talked about when he was a kid. He would read about this in class and pay attention to the teacher, and he'd be reading on the Alamo. And John Wayne basically he saw Ben-Hur, I think, and was like, dude, these movies are huge, and they are. And he's like, I think America needs an epic. So that's what he set out to do. It was his mission. He was like, what would be an epic story? Well, D.W. Griffith kind of had that with Birth of a Nation, because he felt like all the Italians were making all these period piece epics about ancient Rome or Greece or whatever. So he said, let's make an American epic, and he made Birth of a Nation, which was very controversial. Wayne wanted a very big American Western, and that's exactly what he wound up making. Now, as we all know, Wayne was an outright Republican, which there's nothing wrong with that at all. I do not have any problem with that, but he was for the blacklist, which led him into trouble a little later with Richard Widmark. But, see, that's where things started happening. John Wayne wasn't necessarily looking for this to be a historically accurate film. That's key. He didn't want this film to be historically accurate as much as he wanted it to be a commentary on the Cold War. Now, did he succeed at that? I can see some of it, because there's some great lines after the first battle where this character goes, I was proud of them. Even though I was killing them, I was proud of them, that they were willing to die for what they believed in. And I found that line to be very touching, because I think that was Wayne's view on the communists at the time. Basically, he wanted Santa Anna to be represented by Stalin. They even gave him that mustache, the Stalin mustache, if you see it on the one shot where we get a good look at him. It was basically, at the time, the world really, Wayne felt, and I personally felt it as well, even though I didn't live in that time, that the world was basically ganging up on America as it is now. And this is what that was going to be. You have these 185 Texicans up against these 7,000 Mexicans who are well-trained army, they are a well-trained army. And then all of a sudden we have America versus like China, that kind of stuff. And again, it was just Wayne wanting to be more allegorical with this film, which I think was an okay decision. As a historian, I know this movie is really historically inaccurate, but I don't care, because I really enjoyed it. But granted, we also didn't know much of the Alamo at the time. We knew like, oh my God, this happened, of course. But we didn't know a lot of this, like the journals and stuff that were found later. And that's why the 2004 movie, in my opinion, is slightly superior. I shouldn't have said it like that. Why I find the 2004 movie is definitely superior in terms of the historical accuracy. However, historical accuracy doesn't necessarily make a good movie. Characters, plot, and stuff like that, to me, makes a good movie. Now, a problem that Wayne kind of went through, and I'm saying Wayne, there were several others, but mainly Wayne, because Wayne really freaking helmed this, was that this had been done before. Not once, not twice, several times. In 1955 alone, we had The Last Command and the Davy Crockett Walt Disney movie, both telling the story of the Alamo. Both really romanticized, kind of like this one, but not historically accurate at all. In fact, worse off than this, especially David Crockett. That was awful. But The Last Command was also very historically inaccurate. And interesting bit of trivia: there was a TV movie made in the 80s that used stock footage from the 1955 movie The Last Command that was also about the Alamo, which also used the sets that Wayne built in this movie. So that he was having some hard time raising money with that. That was actually one of the biggest things that he was having because Wayne was a huge star, but people were like, "We've seen the Alamo before. We know what happens. They all die. Blah 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 blah. We know what happens." However, it had never been approached with this kind of budget. This movie had a $15 million budget. Now, this was before Cleopatra. This was before 55 Days of Peking. This was before Fall of the Roman Empire. The only movie that was the most expensive epic made a year later in 1961 was El Cid, and that only had a $6 million budget. Only a $6 million. That was a lot of money back then. A $15 million budget. Granted, a lot of that happened because of production problems, and a lot of that unfortunately does kind of fall down to Wayne, to John Wayne's kind of inexperience when it comes to directing, because this is his first directorial debut. I gotta say, this was his directorial debut, a huge epic like this. So a lot of it did come down to him, but $15 million, that's roughly like, that's probably around a $220 million movie made today, and that's no small fucking penny. Um, so I want to talk about the directing, because John Wayne not only starred in this movie, but he also directed it and produced it. That's pretty big, and to me, that's where a lot of the faults in this movie fall, is that it feels like John Wayne is really trying to swallow too much too soon, if that makes any sense. He clearly was overworked. Like they said when he wasn't on screen, he was smoking constantly, drinking, and shit like that, and he was clearly stressed out. I mean, this is a huge fucking movie for your first movie. Sure, he'd worked with some of the best, aka John Ford, but man, it's it's kind of like throwing a kindergartner a camera and saying, now direct Citizen Kane. It doesn't work, or you're going to run into problems. And granted, a lot of this movie is done really well, but a lot of the stuff that happened behind the scenes was mainly Wayne's fault, unfortunately. Um, and I did have to notice, I've seen like The Searchers, I've seen a lot of movies where John Wayne, because I'm a huge fan of John Wayne. Who isn't a fan of the Duke? Uh, when he worked with John Ford. I've seen a lot of his collaborations with John Ford, and this movie honestly looked an awful lot like a John Ford movie. And I found it so interesting because they had worked together so much. I mean, they didn't really like each other, but they respected each other, and they had worked with each other so much that you could almost say that John Ford directed this movie, which I'll talk how that's kind of ironic a little later, but it did feel an awful lot like a John Ford movie, even how it was shot, or how shots were set up. Though usually John Ford worked in the 1:8:5 widescreen aspect ratio, this movie was shot in the 2:20 widescreen aspect ratio, which is a lot thicker, in case you haven't noticed. But it felt like a John Ford movie. Now you see, John Wayne always wanted to direct this movie. So originally he basically wanted to, how do I really put it? He wanted to originally play Sam Houston, which wound up going to Richard Boone. Which Richard Boone is a phenomenal actor, I think, as well. Very underutilized. But unfortunately, a lot of the backers, including the ones at United Artists who released this movie, who were backing him up, there were a lot of backers on this film. There were a lot of backers on this film who believed in Wayne's vision and believed in his message. And they wanted Wayne to be in the movie, and Wayne ultimately agreed that because this movie's budget was swelling so much, he said, I should probably play a bigger role, as well as other investors who kind of, persuaded him to do that, agreed that John Wayne should be a huge part of the movie, which John Wayne actually wound up playing Crockett, which is fine, but when I was watching this movie, I had a very hard time saying, that's Davy Crockett. Believe it or not, my favorite Davy Crockett performance is actually Billy Bob Thornton's in the 2004 Alamo. I think that was he was done extremely well. Here, in this movie, the 1960 movie, I look at him and I'm like, that's just John Wayne being John Wayne, not John Wayne being Davy Crockett. So I understand why he did it, but in the end, I kind of wish he didn't. because I believe Richard Boone was actually originally supposed to play Davy Crockett, and I believe that would have been awesome. But then again, Richard Boone did play a really awesome Sam Houston. He's only in, I think, a total of 3 scenes, Richard Boone, and I thought he totally steals the show. Everything he's in. I love the line. Well, he says this, but the fly. They put me in charge of an army of Texas. But the fly in the buttermilk is there ain't no armies in Texas. I love that line. But Richard Boone definitely steals the show there. But the reason why John Wayne wanted to play Sam Houston in just a small role is because he wanted to focus a lot more on the directing. And I think the movie overall would have been at least better on that field if Wayne had gone with Sam Houston, because then he could have been able to focus on film. His role as Sam Houston would have been more of a cameo than it would be like, this is John Wayne. Because personally, I think the movie would have made at least half of its money back simply with the fact that you advertised that John Wayne directed this. I mean, sure, directors didn't necessarily have the huge plight that they had as they do today. I mean, there are exceptions like Alfred Hitchcock and so on and so forth, but back then it wasn't as much as a plight. John Wayne also, and this is a big no-no in the film industry, though I don't necessarily completely agree with it, but John Wayne backed $7 million himself with this film. He put $7 million of his own money into this film. Now, you're not supposed to do that, because you're supposed to do nothing but make a profit, because what the studio does, the studio pays you to make a movie, and it doesn't matter if the movie, for you, it shouldn't matter if the movie was a flop or not, because you've made that money, even though you should, because then more people want to hire you if it was a success. Look at Gareth Edwards and Godzilla. But John Wayne put $7 million into this project, over half its budget. And that led to the problem, because this movie wasn't a flop per se, because it was the I think it was one of the highest grossing movies that year, but it only made $7 million back. Now, that $7 million was still a lot of money then. Now you have a $15 million budget. Holy fuck. And it only made $7 million back. Today's world, we'd see that as a flop. Back then, what happened was that the budget was so huge that even, no matter how successful this movie was, it couldn't make its money back. Now, that was just in America. Granted, this movie was a huge success in Europe, and for some reason Japan as well, because Japan was obsessed with our westerns, that's why. But it still didn't make its money back until around 10 years after its release, when it was released on TV for the first time. That was when it started making its money back. So I find that interesting, and I'm like, this movie technically shouldn't be called a flop, but it didn't make anywhere. It only made up a little over half of its budget back, because it was just so damn expensive. And a lot of that, with the budget swelling and stuff, and John Wayne having to invest his money, and it led because there's a lot of fucking production problems behind the scene. There was a lot of weather problems where it would rain, and of course they had to make it look dry. There was problems with the extras. The sets were always falling apart. I mean, the sets are wonderful. I'll get into that a little later, but they had a lot of trouble with the sets, and people were getting hurt. Now, Lawrence Harvey, to me, is the epitome of Will Travis. I know he's not necessarily the most accurate Will Travis, but my God, whenever I think of Will Travis, I think of Lawrence Harvey's performance. I just love him. He did an absolutely phenomenal performance in this film. In fact, he's my favorite character in the fucking movie, is Travis, because of how wonderfully Lawrence Harvey portrays him. But there's a scene where the Mexicans arrive at the Alamo for the first time, and they ride up, and this actually happened. And they're like, you need to surrender. Santa Anna's letting you surrender, and you'll be treated fairly. What actually happened in real life is that the real Will Travis fired a cannon as his response. Sure know a quick way to start a war, said Jim Bowie, which I love that line. But when Lawrence Harvey shot the cannon, it recoiled and landed directly on his foot. Now, those cannons were heavy. Not that cannons aren't heavy, but those cannons were heavy, and it completely crushed his foot. And that take is in the movie. Lawrence Harvey, a testament to him, didn't even flinch. Didn't even flinch when it landed on his foot and completely crushed his fucking foot. Holy crap. Now, unfortunately, that meant that he couldn't move around a lot after that. Because immediately when John Wayne yelled "cut," he didn't realize that though he was standing next to him, he didn't realize that the cannon had just recoiled onto his foot. And so when John Wayne yelled "cut," all of a sudden Lawrence Harvey just fell over in utter pain and agony, which I'm like, oh my god. So really just a testament to him. But anyways, that unfortunately meant that he couldn't move a lot, and that he had to be shot. His feet couldn't be shot, so you couldn't have many full body shots of Will Travis. And so John Wayne improvised, and so a lot of the scenes that Lawrence Harvey is in as Will Travis, he's standing still. And personally, I think it's a real testament to Lawrence Harvey that his performance was still as good as it was in this film, because he is indeed just standing still an awful lot. Like the scene where he calls everyone over and asks them if they want to stay or if they want to go, where he draws the line in the ground, which he actually doesn't do, which I think is funny. But I still find that scene really powerful and really well done, especially with Dmitri Tiomkin's music, but we'll get to that a little later. But he's just standing around there, and it took forever for his foot to heal, of course, because, his entire foot was crushed. Stuff like that. And on top of that, Wayne got fucking angry a lot. He couldn't deal, well, neither can I, but he couldn't deal with stress very well. There's this one story on the documentary on the DVD, where a few nuns arrived on set because they were curious what was going on, and John Wayne wound up flipping out on them. Flipping out. Now, he was a devout Christian, and so he asked for forgiveness and stuff like that, and that consumed about 2 days of filming. I don't know why, but that did that. He kind of had a mental breakdown. And then, of course, John Ford showed up. John Ford showed up because he had no faith in Wayne whatsoever as a director, and he wanted to bug Wayne. Now, Wayne, though he had problems, he could direct. I mean, you know what's going on. And so John Ford showed up and had an argument with Wayne, and it stalled the whole production for about a week. And so what John Wayne finally said, he said, fuck it. And he sent John Wayne and John Ford, he sent Ford out with a small crew to just shoot some trivial stuff as like a second unit director, which he never got credit for, which I think that's a little too bad, because some of his stuff is in a movie. A lot of the stuff that John Ford shot is the stuff of the Mexican army marching towards the Alamo or marching around the Alamo. That's stuff that John Ford shot, while everything else was Wayne. And then the biggest one that kind of that stuck out to me was that Wayne and Richard Widmark did not like each other at all. Now, of course, Wayne was the Republican and Richard Widmark was the liberal Democrat. They hated each other, but they had to pretend that they were friends, because in the movie, Jim Bowie, played by Richard Widmark, and David Crockett are friends because they're so alike. Okay, but the problem is that they did not like each other at all, and I think it's a testament to John Wayne's directing and both of the actors to actually convince me that they were actual friends, because I felt like in the movie those two had chemistry, and you could tell that they were kind of rebutting off of each other because the dialogue was so great, and that worked great. And on camera they looked fine together. They were like, yeah, we're really good friends. Once Wayne would yell cut, they'd fight, they'd bicker and everything like that. Widmark hated the fact that he had to use a gun, which I thought was pathetic, while Wayne was like, shut up and take the money and just work. So they fought all the time. That often stalled production ridiculously. Widmark would also complain that Wayne, when directing, he might get too much into it, tell him how to play his character, which is kind of a flaw in terms of the director, but he's the fucking director, you know? And I'm in no way, like, praising Wayne and saying that Wayne was like a god on this movie. No, Wayne had definite flaws. He couldn't deal with the stress, and he couldn't deal with a lot of problems that were going on. However, Wayne got along with Lawrence Harvey, who plays Travis, quite well, and they admired each other. However, they had to pretend like they were kind of slight adversaries. But yet they got along so well, so it's almost the complete opposite. But yeah, just a testament that they were able to sell me this, despite the fact that they had some major disagreements between Wayne and Widmark. Just major props to that. One thing also that I want to really start talking about here is I fucking love this set. This set is absolutely beautiful and very historically accurate. Wayne and the crew put a lot of detail into this set of both building the old San Antonio and especially the Alamo set itself. It looks gorgeous, and it's extremely well utilized. Unlike the set in 55 Days of Peking, made in 1963, because that had the world record until next year with Fall of the Roman Empire for the largest set, and unfortunately, you don't see any of it. Or you do see it, but you only see it for like a couple seconds. Like they don't like in 55 Days of Peking, they never utilized that set. Here they utilized it completely. A lot of wide shots, a lot of interaction shots, a lot of shots of people standing around in different rooms. They actually built the Alamo. There's no doubt about it. They built like a full-scale recreation of the actual mission and the actual fort of the Alamo. They had all the gun positions correct. They had all the potholes correct. They had the stables correct. They just literally recreated the entire thing. So major fucking props to them for being able to do that. Like, holy crap, is that set absolutely beautiful. And a lot of these wide shots you see of the Mexicans charging forward, I mean, it looks absolutely gorgeous. This is why this is overall my favorite Alamo movies, because that set is so amazing. Granted, in other films, an Alamo set had been built before, but not to this extent. Like, in other films, they build, like, little chunks and just film there, and then they build another chunk over here, and they tear down that one and build this one. No. On this film, you got the whole shit and caboodle. So that's why you have a lot of these, like, really awesome wide shots of, like, the entire battle going on, or like, of everybody walking around. Like, the character Finn, when he returns, there's this great wide shot that just shows one whole side of the Alamo wall. And it's gorgeous because it's all there. It's all real. There's no CG here. There's no miniatures. There's no matte paintings. It's all there. And I loved it. Like, I was like, oh my god, look at that in the back. Oh my god, it's all the trivial stuff that why I keep coming back to epics is because you notice a lot of stuff that you never noticed before that you see in the background just to show the amount of detail that the set designers went through. And personally, I believe that the set design on this film should have received an Academy Award nomination if it wasn't for the fact that the Oscars had their heads up their asses so much and couldn't see a good movie to save their life, because John Wayne was a Republican, and that's exactly the reason why. Don't even try to debate it. And again, as I stated earlier, this set was also reused in the Alamo 13 Days of Glory starring James Arness and Alec Baldwin, the same set. And it still stands today. They call it the Alamo Village. It's still there. It's kind of decaying, and I would love to see it restored just for movie's sake. But it's still there. I mean, so a testament. They actually built the Alamo. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So something else that I kind of had mixed feelings about with this movie, and this is the main thing, is the writing by James Edward Grant. Now, John Wayne had like a huge boner for this guy because he wrote a lot of movies that John Wayne was in, and John Wayne loved his dialogue. What I like about the writing in this film is that it is hilarious at times and sentimental at others. There are some moments where I outright laughed out loud, and then there were quite a few scenes where it's like, oh, that's actually really sad and sentimental, and the dialogue is great. So that's something that I want to give props to this movie for, is that the dialogue in this movie is absolutely wonderful. Like, I honestly say, like, Quentin Tarantino levels of wonderful. The fly in the buttermilk. That's one of the lines that I'm like, yes, this movie is so hilarious. Oh, that ain't no fair way to fight a war. The dialogue is great in this movie. There's just so much of it. That's the problem. There's just so much of it. A vast majority is here's the thing with the movie, and I'll get into the film's pacing a little later. It just feels like there's some scenes that just get drawn out too much, and specifically I'm talking about like the night that David Crockett first arrives in San Antonio. Though a majority of the dialogue is witty and smart, it just left me scratching my head like, why is it there? But we'll get into pacing a little bit later. Like, the writing is fucking hilarious. There may have, like, no character whatsoever, but the dialogue says everything you want to know about them. There's two characters in specifically that I want to talk about. There's Lieutenant Finn and the cannon. He's like, holy shit! And Lieutenant Finn goes up, and he goes up to the beekeeper and says, I'm so damn scared I could drink this whole thing. Maybe I will. And I just laugh at that dialogue. And then there's Chill Willis as the beekeeper. Chill Willis actually received an Academy Award nomination for this movie, and he deserved it because he is so fucking funny. Every single scene he's in, like when Smitty gets hurt in the arm, this character Smitty, who's the youngest person at the Alamo, who delivers the message to Sam Houston, the beekeeper goes, oh, well, look at that, nothing a little Dr. Beekeeper can't fix it. He pours his alcohol in it, and Smitty's like, see, and he faints because of the pain. And the beekeeper's like, oh, it's just so, he's hilarious in this movie. But you see, that's ultimately the problem, is the writing, is that John Wayne loved the writer so much that he didn't dare cut anything. Which goes into my next complaint, and my biggest complaint with this movie, and that is, oh, I just moved everything. My biggest complaint with this movie is the movie's pacing. It is slow as fuck. Slow as fuck. You know, to me, that's the biggest sin in a movie, is that if I feel bored, that's a problem. That's why I don't really care for Heaven's Gates. And here's the problem. Here's actually the main thing that's the problem. When Crockett arrives and finds the female character, Graciela, or however the fuck you pronounce her name, look, I didn't care that much. It should have been cut all together. It really should have been cut all together. I mean, it has no purpose for the plot at all. It just focuses on her problems with her kind of fiance and Wayne trying to fix it. And I'm not saying Crockett, because that was just Wayne. And Wayne trying to fix it. It has no purpose to the plot whatsoever. And it could have easily have been rewritten. Again, this was mainly because Wayne was too afraid to counter the writer because he loved him so much. It could have easily been rewritten that, you know, what Graciela does is Wayne basically tells her to write a fake note from Santa Ana, to forge a note, and that way he could keep his men to fight for the Alamo. And Graciela is the one that does it, which is the only thing that she has that progresses the plot at all. And unfortunately, that's it. You know, that's the only thing with her character. Her character doesn't progress, and she doesn't regress. She's just there. And you know, you could have easily have rewritten it that anyone, because you know why? They're in Texas. They're in fucking Mexico at the time. So Wayne could have grabbed anyone and said, could you write me a note or a letter in Spanish? Why? Why is that there? It's so boring and absolutely pointless. The dialogue is fine, yes. But I was so bored because I had nothing to do, and it takes up a huge chunk of the movie. I'm not kidding. This takes up 20 minutes of the film. 20 fucking minutes. And I'm talking about the 2.5 hour cut version, which is my personal favorite cut. And it's boring as fuck. It's boring as fuck, and there are scenes that are overly drawn out. For example, I personally find the scene where the women and children are being evacuated from the Alamo, I find that scene to be extremely painfully boring even. You know, scenes like that could have been cut out. This movie could have easily been trimmed down to 2 hours, and I would have been completely fine with it, and the pacing would have been better. Now, here's something that I want to talk about. There are 2 cuts of the movie. The original 202 cut is also known as the Roadshow cut, which is the original one that was released in 1960. Now, that's the one that I saw as a kid on TCM. But unfortunately now it's almost been lost forever, because when they restored it and released it again as kind of like a tribute Roadshow thing, unfortunately the rails got lost and burned. But we can watch it on like channels like Encore, Western, and TCM. They do play it, which then makes me wonder why the fuck they don't just release it on DVD anyways, because they have the fucking power to do that. Whatever, probably a lot of copyright bullshit. But the DVD one that I have and that most people have seen is the 2.5 hour cut version, which I personally see as the superior cut, and that's also the one that I'm talking about now. And it left me wondering, if I felt that the 2.5 hour cut one was unbelievably slow. What the fuck is the 202-minute cut one like? Seriously? Now, what's interesting is you can actually watch these cut scenes on YouTube. Somebody actually watched them, and I managed to kind of figure out where they were fit into the movie. And I was like, I'm so glad these were cut for the DVD because they do nothing but slow down the plot, the already slow plot, and they're pointless. The only scene in the extended cut that I absolutely loved and wished was still in the movie was the Parsons funeral. And that's because the parson was an interesting character. He prayed all the time, but yet he was proactive. He said he was a man of God, but he was very proactive. And he was just a really well written character. And I love forgive me, I forgot his name, but the actor who plays him, I just love the actor. He always has a sincere level to his performance. And when he dies, it was a very touching moment, but it was cut from the 2.5-hour cut. What I love about this movie, I like a lot about it. The battle scenes are really fun and energetic. They are. They're full of energy. They're full of life. They're absolutely beautifully shot. I just love the sound effects building in it, and I love the music. And you know what was great was that I actually felt bad for the defendants. You know, even though I knew what was coming, I was still rooting for them. Even though I knew they were all going to die, I was still rooting for them and hoping for them to succeed. So the battles are really fun and energetic. There's 2 battles in this movie. Both of them are unbelievably huge and had thousands upon thousands of extras. I think the most extras they had during the final battle sequence was the actual 7,000. I was like, holy fuck. The other thing that I absolutely adore about this movie is the music score by Dmitri Tiomkin. Wow, it's booming during parts. It's very sentimental at parts. The Green Leaves of Summer, that song, is beautiful. I love listening to that song. It's so calm, but yet it can be so rousing at the same time. Absolutely beautiful. And it is this score. It's actually this score here that wound up landing Dmitri Tiomkin having a job with Bronson Studio once they let go of Miklos Rozsa, who complained about El Cid. But I digress. It's an absolutely beautiful score. It could be very brash at moments, such as the battle sequences. And then all of a sudden you have, like, example, the part where John Wayne dies. The music has this wonderful trumpet music playing, and it's very, very beautiful, in my opinion, and very, very sentimental. It's very, very, very well done. So, as the movie as a whole, it is kind of a hit or miss, but I really do enjoy this movie, and, you know, it is kind of, I shouldn't say hit or miss, because I definitely enjoy more with this movie than I do a lot of other things. You know, I definitely enjoy more in this film than I don't enjoy. I mean, yeah, it bored me at parts, but man, its payoff was wonderful. So I would give this movie I'm gonna give it a solid 3.5 out of 5. I mean, a 3.5 out of 4. I apologize, man, I need to get my head out of the clouds. A 3.5 out of 4. Great movie. Check it out if you're curious. I mean, it's wonderful writing. Just check it out. So, do stay tuned for the next episode of Creature Feature Double Feature, which will be with Andres this time, spoiler alert, and stay tuned for the teaser trailer for my new movie, Which Way They Walk, which will continue production again in April, so stay tuned for that. Subscribe to Adam Noyce, subscribe to my film archive, subscribe to the Godzilla Saga, like me on Facebook, and this is Adam Noyce from Adam Noyce saying, sayonara.